Morning. Okay. Abena, Asara, and Phylisia unfortunately won't be with us today. But let's wait a few more minutes because they were the only ones who said they weren't with us. Um, yeah, because Robin hasn't joined us yet. So actually, while we wait, I'm going to ask each of you to just say a little something about your work. Introduce yourself to our audience. And I'll start. So I'm Judy Byfield. I'm a historian of Nigeria, and I'm at Cornell University. Um, Esther?
Warm greetings, everyone. I hope my volume is okay. Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, so my name is Esther Oluwashino Ajayilowo, Esther Ajayilowo for short, and I'm an assistant professor at Spelman College. Well, at the moment, because from this fall, I'm transitioning into Texas Christian University. So I'm an assistant professor of women's and gender studies and focusing on women's health. And my research is mainly on reproductive epistemologies, really trying to amplify indigenous birthing knowledge, and I'm working on my book manuscript in that regard. So very happy to be here with you all at this session. It's early morning for me, but I'm here.
Yes, that's the key thing. Takara? Takara?
I'm getting a message that
Um,
she's still connecting to audio. Like maybe she's having a
okay.
problem.
Yeah. All right. Okay, you're muted.
Yes.
Okay, okay. Perfect. Yes, so just tell us a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself to our audience.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Takara Brunson. I'm an associate professor at Texas A&M University in College Station, and I'm trained as a historian of Latin America and the African diaspora.
Great. Marcia?
Hello, my name is Marcia Barrett. I'm an assistant professor of history at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. I'm a historian of modern U.S. political history with an interest in public policy, social movements, and race and their impact on the state and governance in the U.S.
Okay, and Michelle.
Good morning, I'm Michelle Thompson. I am a former adjunct professor at City College in New York. I own my own business, Resistant Vision Coaching and Consulting, where we help professionals achieve work-life balance. And my scholarship is connected to 19th century Jamaica and the descendants of maroon communities there.
Oh, wonderful. So, since a few people aren't with us this morning, I think we can take up to 10 minutes then, and I will just ask you to go in the order in which you're listed on the program. Okay, so that means we'll start first with Esther.
All right. Now,
Yeah,
right.
okay, sorry everyone. My name is Helen Uga. I'm one of the panelists.
Hi, Helen. I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were here. So, actually, before we start with Esther, Ellen, would you just introduce yourself?
So my name is Helen Uga. I work at the Department of English at Alizade University here in Nigeria. I work on women's experiences of sexual pleasure, and presently I'm working on women's experiences of public space violence in Nigeria.
Great, welcome. Okay, so each panelist now will have 10 minutes, and I'm going to set the alarm, but I'm also going to try and make sure it's not too obtrusive. Esther.
All right, thank you. So it's nice to meet everyone virtually. And so I am just like a happy reader, right? And I'm not sure if this is a very usual thing. I haven't attended a lot of author mixed readers, but I am just like very excited and happy to read this book. So I really love the focus on joy, that it centers joy and just sort of like put it in the middle with all of the attempts to grapple with what that means, how we can find it, how it's been taken away by, sometimes institution, the administration, and all of that was just like really great to grapple with. And I'm saying this because it's not always that we find that joy for Black women in the academia is put at the center of the analysis. So I really love that these centers joy are supposed to perhaps centering oppression, racism, sexism, and then working out to say, hey, well, we have all of these, and then maybe we do. So I was really delighted that the authors and also the editor made that attempt. So I really love the intentionality of centering joy. What I also really love, so I'm going to say a lot about what I love, so you don't bear with me because this is how I genuinely feel. And I think I really also needed to read this book at this moment. So for me, it's just beyond just really discussing these on this panel, but just like really bringing myself into it. So I appreciate, that concept of the personal and weaving that with the political and the social that this book really represents. I just like really happy to read everyone's story that is not just about these are all of the problems, but the ways that they're trying to create community, the way they're trying to find joy, what that means. And I also love that it wasn't given the hope of, hey, we all can find joy. This is what it looks like. This is where it is, right? So making us just like really grapple and deal with all of the messiness and complexities without just like leaving us with nothing and with no hope, right? So I loved that. I love that it was really connecting back to, Black feminists, Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks, and what we're actually up and against. I love that it was clear what we're all dealing with, right? All of the commonalities, but also in different ways that we navigate all of the, experiences for Black women in the academia. So again, this was really good, a good book. I took the time, read in details, and so much appreciated it. I love that, Black women was not presented as a monolith. I love how we have, various authors from diverse backgrounds and how we were able to see not just Blackness and womanness, but also how it intersects with other kinds of identities. I love that chapter. I think it's from Professor Asare that focused on just even. So not just person who we are, but also where we find ourselves and the place. So I love that transnational context as well. So what I love all of this, I, tend to really think deeply about what we are up against as presented in this book. So for me, it seems that at the very least, it is racism and sexism, right? So because Black and being women in the academia. And then there were discussions in various chapters in the introduction, thinking about how we're up against the neoliberal academy, we're up against white supremacists, sometimes up against like misogyny, patriarchy within the institution, all the ways that, in particular, the academic, the North America, the US, more particularly, just doesn't create that room, that community, the things that we want and how we want to be supported as Black women in the academia. All of that was really clear, but I tend to really wonder if the editors, the authors really thought about what it means for Black women in the academia. Ooh, and I'm trying to really word this really correctly, who are not maybe in any PWI Or let me just be more specific. So Black women working in an HBCU, for instance, what does that experience look like, right? Is there really an assumption in this book that maybe there's joy in those spaces where it's just it is just Black, it is just women even, right? So I think that for me, it was just like really missing that discussion of what it means to be in a place where, well, so this is just us. What do we call our experience, right? Those experiences that are not palatable in such spaces. How do we put a finger to it? Is there an assumption that it doesn't exist? Does, that kind of experience, and I don't even know what to call it, right? So this is me just like asking this question. Is there an assumption that it's all good and it's all joy in that kind of space where we don't have white, scholars, white male scholars, or white women who don't understand the kinds of experience that we experience as Black women, who don't understand how we need to be supported? Is there an assumption that it's all joy in those spaces? When there's really lack of joy and Black women in those spaces really struggle, what do we call it? How do we put a name to it? How do we grapple with that? And how do we really find joy in those sort of spaces? So for me, that would be like a question that I'm putting out there. And I was really wondering if what the CFP looked like. Was there really an attempt to reach Black women in the academia who are working in HBCUs, for instance, to sort of put their voice into these stories as well, to understand what that experience is like. So that was just one thing that I noted. And also really thinking about, I think reading Professor Sam, she was alluding to that little bit, when she's thinking about space, but also we're thinking about a place, right? I think there's that assumption that most spaces and most places, WI, where we find our own community and we have to go out to look for those community. But what happens when we have a place where she'll be home and she'll feel like home and we're not finding the home and joy? So that will be my question to the editors who might be responding as well. So I guess I'll stop here.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, our next presenter, Marcia Barrett.
Thank you. And I really appreciate your comments already, because mine do relate and connect to some of the questions that you had as well. But I wanted to start by talking about what I really appreciated about this book. And I really could probably talk for quite a long time about the way that I was able to connect with a variety of experiences in this text. It's interesting. I actually felt it was almost jarring, actually, at times to sort of see women in, I would say, still right in vulnerable situations and positions, feeling their experiences. I was curious about what is the potential, fallout, right, for your candor, but also what is held back at the same time, right? Because I imagine there are a number of details, right, that had to be left off the page, right, or at least that is my sort of maybe sort of assumption, right, about this process. So I'm curious about that as well. But one thing I wanted to start off by saying is that I really appreciated how the authors in this text are, from chapter to chapter, are actually in conversation with one another. That is something that was actually pretty unique for me in terms of my experience of the edited volumes I tend to read, and I love that those many right, connections to, it seems as if the authors were talking to one another, right, bringing up some of the same authors and feminist thinkers, and that there's so much overlap, sort of interconnectivity in these texts that I really appreciated. I also, appreciated the variety of experiences of young academics, in particular, sort of graduate students, newly minted tenure track professors, sort of going out into the world. But in that point, a book like this, right, obviously you can't it's difficult, or you can't talk, represent every Black woman's experience, but it did make me think, about Black women who are not WIs, right, as you mentioned, but also women who have made it. The university presidents, the deans, people who seemingly, right, they have, right, climbed the ivory tower. I wonder what their experiences are like, and also if there is even a possibility, right, to talk about your experiences like this if you are still in academia because of, just the nature, right, of the work we're doing in the field that we're in, or the industry that we're in. So it makes me wonder about the limitations of this form of expression. Um, okay. So one thing I wanted to highlight is that when I was reading the chapters in part one, and reading the women's sort of expressions of the moments when, or identifying the moments when they experience joy, I wondered, one, how do we make joy sort of sustainable, right? Because some of these moments that I was reading, they seemed, at least for my own experience, I know they can be, that high can be quite fleeting, right? Even when you do, right, escape to that next university, then you realize what your next university is really like, right? And then, that joy can disappear. And it made me wonder, also, why joy? Why are we looking to joy in our job in academia? Is that something that Black women do? The Nellie McKay quote that appeared in a number of the chapters, right? Quote, "To be Black and female in the academy has its own particular frustration because it was never intended for us to be here. We are in spaces that have been appropriated for us." I kept coming back to this quote and this idea because it made me wonder what professional space is intended for Black women, right? And also, and if that's the case, and if sort of coming from that perspective, I wonder if we maybe, like, what would be the benefit perhaps of Black women academics looking beyond academia to build networks with professionals and leaders outside of this industry? Because I would imagine there are so many similarities and possibilities for collaboration and mutual support outside of academia. And it left me wondering, a question I would love to ask the authors who participated and the editors, um, if what is truly unique about this experience that we are having in academia. I would love to perhaps have a conversation about that as well. Um, so let me see. And then I think those are the main my main points. But I was curious for those who were editing and writing this book, if their views on the potential for joy in the academy changed, right, as they worked on this volume. So I think I will stop there for now. But I could certainly talk about a number of the chapters that really spoke to me, right? And in particular, like talking about this idea of connecting to Black women outside of academia, chapter 13, Backs of Steel. Right. I really also enjoyed that chapter in particular because the author started by talking about the shared experience of Black women leaders inside and outside of academia. And that I was really drawn to that idea, because I just keep thinking as I read that there's a potential for community, even sort of beyond maybe the restrictions many of us have given to ourselves. And I am similar, other than just like the few friends I know, right, who are in the sciences or public health, and sort of interestingly, who also have, right, PhDs but left for industry. I think there's so many important similarities and connections there, that maybe we would all benefit, right, from sort of connecting and not siloing ourselves in that way. Okay, as I said, I could go on forever, but I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcia. And so now we have Takara.
All right. Thank you. So I want to start by thanking the co-editors for editing such an important book. I think, like many of us, we spend the school term like always on the go, focused on doing the research, the writing, the teaching. And so to have this moment during the summer to read this book, digest all of the insights it provides, and then to reflect on what that might look like as we move forward is really useful. I want to focus on some points raised in several chapters that really spoke to my experiences. And just for a quick background, I started out my career in a tenure track position in the history department at an HBCU and in the Mid-Atlantic, and then moved to Central California, where I worked for a state school where the majority of the students were similarly first generation, more of them from working class backgrounds, but ethnically and racially, the campus was much more diverse while having a very small Black population. And then now I've just completed my first few years at an R1 institution in Central Texas that has a population of about 70,000 students while also having a very small Black population. So a lot of range in terms of thinking about the academy. I've returned to a history department. I was previously in ethnic studies, but there's a lot of overlap that I found made this book really interesting for thinking about what it meant to navigate those spaces as a Black woman. So first, in their essay on Black women administrators in chapter 7, Letitia Bates and Whitney Gaskins write that, quote, "Many Black women are already engaging in equity work within and outside our institutions. Before these roles were created and bestowed on us. To be clear, we have agency, and although the feeling is one being put upon, hence the use of the word bestowed, the choice to accept these roles and this work is one we thoughtfully undertook. We do our best to make sense of the negative impact of the work by capitalizing on the joy it brings us," right? Now, Bates and Gaskins note how Black women are expected to take on DEI roles alongside other teaching, research, and service positions, right? And this was really striking to me, I think, because first and foremost, during the process of applying to graduate school and then the graduate school experience, a lot of us come to view this transition into the academy as professionals as one that's informed by some sort of calling, right? It's not just a job, it's actually a vocation. We're here to do important work. We see our research as advancing the communities that we are writing about, that we're hopefully writing in conversation with. And then we hope that our teaching moving into tenure track or non-tenure track roles is one that will help uplift those communities as well as the students that we're working with, and that will eventually help transform the nature of the academy. And so I really like how they acknowledge the agency while recognizing how oftentimes those roles have already been crafted for us. And then we're expected to figure out how to navigate those expectations that really are limited in their vision for how we might impact the local culture of the institutions that we've them joined. Right? Their discussion of DEI work, especially living in Texas in 2024, is really interesting because of how the laws implemented by the state government have undermined a lot of the work done, certainly since 2020, but really over the past couple of decades, and shutting down many of the institutions that exist. And so you have faculty members, including many Black women who've passionately taken on these positions, who now are being targeted either by state legislatures, by private activists, by philanthropists or university donors, who, more than not seeing their work as beneficial, actually position them as threats to the culture of universities and the United States. And so I think there's more conversation we could have there. But I really like how this chapter talks about how this work can be fulfilling to us. I think it's interesting to continue that conversation given all that's transpired over the past year in states like Texas and Florida. Second, Bates and Gaskin's observations became even more interesting for me when considered in relation to the experiences of the editor and our co-panelist, Michelle Dionne Thompson, who writes in chapter 6. Thompson describes her efforts to forge a career at the margins of the academy. As she highlights, most Black women, Indigenous women, and women of color who hold teaching positions at universities do so as non-tenure track instructors who are exploited with high teaching loads and low pay, in addition to service. And this is certainly something that I identified working in California for a California state institution. It was system-wide, right? I like that this chapter highlights that this is a reflection of how capitalism has shaped academia as a labor system that continues to devalue women, especially Black women. And I think what was really powerful about this chapter is highlighting the mental health impact of poverty wages and exclusion from tenure track positions. Because again, we're brought into the academy and socialized to view our work as significant for the social justice work that we're doing, but also the prestige that comes with a certain model of doing academic work. And so here Thompson presents a model that I think is really useful because she highlights being both within and just outside of academia, teaching and doing, developing her own business, but also shows us that we can set our own terms that are fulfilling, that allow us to evade the forms of exploitation that so many Black women confront in the institutions, right? And to set our own models of success. And then finally in chapter 15, Cecile, is it pronounced Achillean or Cillian? I don't want to butcher her name. But she further imagines what it looks like to define one's relationship to the academy as a perpetual outsider. In this case, she identifies her experiences as a Black woman from the Caribbean who wears locks. And she uses one of my favorite liberatory concepts, marronage, this practice in which enslaved peoples would flee plantations and build independent communities with other African descended, and Indigenous peoples in mountains and swamps. The author describes intentionally leaving campuses on which she worked in order to find and create spaces in which she could be herself. This included traveling to places to have her hair done, finding people with shared identities, and ultimately working to affirm herself outside of these dominant expectations regarding what a professor should look like and who was valued as a member of the academy. I think collectively, these brief examples highlight the ongoing need to critique our socialization, to view our work in the academy as a calling. And this approach allows for moments of joy while also leading many of us to jeopardize our mental health and physical well-being. Personally, I think similar to some of the comments made by Marcia a few moments ago, I look for these moments of joy while working to reconcile the fact that I have a job, that I am employed to fulfill a position. And so again, I think this is worth continuing to discuss. What does it mean to be passionate about our work while also recognizing we are workers, we are employed by these very problematic capitalist entities, right? At the same time, I do desire to utilize the resources and privileges that come with my job to benefit other faculty, staff, and students. And so I appreciate the strategies outlined throughout the volume. What they highlight is the need for ongoing practices of community building, both within and beyond our institutions. And so I look forward to continuing this conversation with my co-panelists and the audience. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all so much for your very stimulating comments. And so now we're going to turn to Michelle Dionne Thompson, who will be our respondent. And after that, we will open for, I will ask the panelists if they want to comment on comments made by each other, and then we will open out to the audience. I'm sorry, I'm doing it again, Helen. So sorry. Okay, Ellen, you will speak next, and then we will go to Michelle.
All right, thank you very much. Can you hear me clearly? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, we
all
can
right,
hear
thank
you.
you. Okay, thank you very much. What I love most about the book is that it exposes the realities of these women's experiences through their first-hand accounts of how they navigate and navigating and have navigated the academic terrain in the American academia as Black women, especially in their business of the academia, such as the promotion, tenure track appointments, research, teaching, learning, and the rest of all that. For me personally, the depiction of what counts as joy for each of the women reiterates how important it is to be a part of the community within the academia, where community members are reliable and accountable. For instance, each of the stories told from each of the women's viewpoints profiles perspective on the emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual complexities of achieving pleasure, purpose, and fulfillment in their academia. One of the most fascinating aspects of the book for me is how the women's stories, on the one hand, reflects the state of the American academia for Black women, while situating their experiences within the broader American context of racism and all the forms of discrimination that goes hand in hand with racism. On the other hand, it mirrors to some extent the experiences of professional Black women, especially those in the academia in many countries of the world. The women's experiences resonate with that of many women in the academia, even here in Nigeria. For instance, I personally, as a Nigerian female in the Nigerian academia, can resonate with Robin's story or Robin's experiences in the first chapter. As a Nigerian female in the Nigerian academia space that is majorly patriarchal, you are given very minimal opportunities to express your attitude or lose yourself to emotion. Like if you do that, you'll be say, oh, she's just a woman, that is why she's like that. But when men do such, they are considered to be right because they are considered to have the right to be as assertive as they want to be, which on the other hand is a crime for many women. But if women dare to be assertive, they will be deemed aggressive and disrespectful. So the patriarchy at play in Nigeria, in the Nigerian academia, okay, in Nigeria generally also works in the academia. But naturally, you would expect that since the academia is a space for the educated and the enlightened, that patriarchy would not be at play, but the opposite is the case. I move on to say that the structure and content of the book is not only captivating, but highly estimable. Though each chapter is unique, each of the stories are well connected, so much so that there's a mix of the analytical with the experiential. So each chapter is autobiographical, practical, theoretical, and also offers insights about gender, race, Blackness, feminism, professionalism, and a whole lot of other factors, which offers insights into feminist analysis of their experiences as Black women and providing nuanced understanding of the concepts around race, gender, and class. Now, personally, as a budding scholar in the field of women, gender, and sexuality studies, my knowledge about several concepts in the field has broadened by reading this book. So I really must appreciate Professor Adherence, or the president of the LSA, for inviting me to be one of the panelists in this section. Naturally, as human and as a female, it is sometimes very difficult to share your emotional and personal experiences and give honest accounts about them. But one of this book's strengths is how the women have honestly shared their vulnerabilities, insecurities, fears, triumph in the book. And I find it very, very engaging. So much so that several times while reading the book, I couldn't help but ask the authors, like in my head, like, how did you do it? How did you cope? How were you so strong and resilient? Where did you get your strength from? How were you able to overcome your fears? By including the stories about 30 women at different stages in the academia, the book provides an exhaustive view of the myriad of challenges encountered by Black women in the American academia at different stages in their career and how they navigate the terrain in their quest for joy and fulfillment. Now, though most of the narrative includes the effects of COVID-19 pandemic on women's career path and their racial reckoning of the pandemic, the relevance of the book goes beyond the pandemic. Like it will always be relevant in many, many years to come, especially as it provides strategies for navigating and thriving in the challenging moments within the academia. It is also comprehensive, multifaceted, and a practical inspiration for women in the academia generally, like all over the world. However, I would have liked some of the panelists have said so far, I would have loved it more if the book has captured the experiences of Black women in predominantly Black institutions, as well as the experiences of migrant Black women who arrived America as graduate students or as faculty. Nevertheless, there are a lot of issues to unpack in the book, like Blackness, race, microaggression, what it means to be Black, what it means to be a Black woman in the academia. Now, the book is not just an autoethnography, but a potpourri of historical facts. Like I learned a lot about the American system by reading the book. And what struck me most about each woman's definition um, of joy, like each of the authors have what they deem or what they perceive to be as joy, ranging from getting a tenure track job to attending tenure track, finishing a PhD, and the rest of all that. So joy comes in various ways depending on whose perspective it is being investigated. However, what's common in the women's perspective about joy is a freedom from worry, the freedom from the fear of discrimination, and the freedom to dictate one's space, which I think is our right as as a human and as a woman as well. So with this book, the authors and editors have created a Bible, or we can call it an encyclopedia, that women of color all over the world can also refer to in order to grow strong in their academic and career development. The book can be likened to the book of Psalms that provides support and hope in times of despair. Now, I think I'll stop now. That is all I have to say for the book. So thank you very much to the authors and the editors for such a compelling narrative.
Thank you so much, Helen. One interjection, Michelle, before you start. I'm going to say that Helen has actually put on the table for us a really good idea that maybe if there's going to be a second volume, it actually could be comparative, looking at Black women faculty in different countries. So Nigeria, Brazil, Jamaica, as well as the American institution. But so I do not envy you at all, Michelle. Our panelists this morning, I think, have offered such thoughtful comments and responses to this book. So I will turn it over to you now.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us this morning and including us in including When Will the Joy Come as part of this conference. As Judith said, I'm one of the editors of this book, and it's really a pleasure to hear your feedback about this volume. I wanted to say a little something before I responded specifically to your really, really thoughtful comments, and perhaps some of my remarks will address some of it, and I will definitely address some of the questions that you led, your really amazing questions at as well. As you said, the focus of my chapter and my particular chapter, A View from the Margins of Academia, is about how capitalism co-ops the ability for marginalized groups, in particular Black women in the US, to be fully engaged in academia. It robs Black women of the ability to experience and have joy in any context, capitalism that is, working or not, right? The communities that we form with each other as we write about our experiences in academia and connect through conferences like this are critical to navigating the ivory tower and is a primary way that we can resist the demands that the industry throws at us. Yes, there are likely more Black women in academia than ever before, and while this is the case, the resources and the pay for said women are such that the industry can reap a profit from our labor. Most of us are part-time faculty when we're in academia. We teach because we love our fields. We love the research we have done, and we want to impart that to the students in our classrooms. We are thrilled to be teaching the courses we do teach. There are often courses that did not exist before we arrived at these schools, be them private or public institutions. And yet it puts us in a position where we are unable to dictate our hours. The department tells us on what days and what time slots we can teach, and we get the access to those after everyone else has taken, which is fine. It's what it is, right? But there were real limits with that. We don't have the resources to further research what we did in our doctoral programs are often ineligible for grants, either internally or externally, to do research domestically or abroad, and this impacts our ability to publish the path to tenure track jobs. And for many of us, what is actually very, very satisfying and joyful to actually publish the work that we love. Because we're trying to cobble together a living, we don't have the benefit of time in which we could write the book that we care so much about. We are isolated from departments and colleagues, so we struggle to form a cadre of colleagues who can provide us with the feedback on our work and whose work we can read to reciprocate. The lack of security in these positions keep us on our economic and emotional toes. Departments can cancel courses on a moment's notice, which means that the math doesn't add up in our lives and we may not be able to support ourselves while doing this work. And you already know this. And this is not to say that the fate of Black women working in the full-time academy is any less exploitative, right? We're expected, now that we have our shiny degrees and coveted tenure track positions, to do much of the labor in the department, regardless of what the consequences are for building our careers. I don't know if you noticed, but in the wake of October 7th, 2023, I just want to add that that was the day after my birthday, and I just found that rude. Anyhow, and the ensuing war against Palestinians, that Black women scholars who led institutions of higher education were systematically targeted in their leadership. This attack was used as an excuse to remove Black women from higher education leadership. I'm thinking in particular of Dr. Gay, and there were many other examples of us who were targeted. It's fine if we add to the numbers of demonstrating some weak-willed commitment to diversity, but we need to make sure we're not leading institutions in ways that the people, I guess, in ways that could undermine the status quo. We have to be committed to the white supremacist, sexist, and capitalist structure that exists, including kowtowing to donors who don't have our expertise and understanding of our fields if we plan to keep these leadership positions. Last year, 2 women who were leading universities actually died on the job. One of them was actually attending a colleague's funeral. Really? Jeez. Our lives end in the grip of these institutions of higher education where we teach, publish, serve, and lead. But you already know this. So how do we put ourselves first and not the institution's interests ahead of our own? What is the way forward from this exploitation? Many of the chapters, as you guys have pointed to, point to some of these solutions, right? For me, that was owning my own business. Since this was published, I no longer teach in higher education. The last straw for me was when the school I worked for expected me to come back to the classroom before I was vaccinated. A classroom with nearly 40 students and no windows. Many of you taught under these circumstances. Thank you for your service because this is what it was in the height of the pandemic. My spouse has dementia, and this was not something I could afford to do. Others decided to change schools. This was a shift that enabled them to be closer to the communities that could hold them and their families. They could be in places that would fuel them and bring them life. Others decided to decline the DEIB work, the diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and justice work that was expected of them. It was clear institutions would not consider this service as they were going up for tenure, and it was definitely not moving the publications along at a quicker pace. Others left academia as an industry overall, right? And you guys pointed to some of that. They were able to find work that better paid them with better hours that created the life they sought, and who could blame them? One of the solutions that scholars pointed to in this volume, and this is to answer some of the questions about, so what is this joy thing? Was to build communities of scholars so they could rely on each other and skip the explaining, the doubt, the undermining of lived experiences of Black women in academia. The Black German scholars spoke to this in their chapter for Black German women. They formed communities where they could take care of themselves and nurture their scholarship. And this is an example of community care at its finest. Capitalism needs us functioning as individuals so that we can't tell that the system works against us. I think of the work of Tricia Hershey and the demand for rest. The public-facing work she has done is never alone. She creates communities of Black women resting, publicly resting. Self-care is not sufficient, and I do recommend it in my business. If we don't take care of ourselves, we can't do what we need to do on any given day. However, it's a community care that provides the ballast for Black women in such a directly anti-Black industry. We cannot shoulder this alone. The work we do in this industry literally kills us. Further, with community care, we are better able to identify the patterns of behaviors that come our way and avoid personalizing what we see. We can see that racism and sexism are up to their old tricks. We don't blame ourselves for what has gone awry. We can locate the challenges we have with the industry as a whole and move out of individualized solutions. As a result, community care unlocks the keys to joy. I think that this volume highlights the need to understand that external markers won't keep us stability with joy with us. It is in our delight with ourselves, appreciation of the lives we built, that actually allow us to experience joy. It's not going to be directly tied to any work that we do, especially under capitalism. So that answers some of your questions. If you will, I would like to address some of the other ones. I love the question about, so when white men are around, I hope I got this correct. When white men aren't around, do we experience joy? And I joy is not a destination. It's a state of, and it's not, and when I say that, I don't want to apply a stability to it, right? It 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 can be an underlying state with us, but it fluctuates every day, right? And so I think when we get to be around each other as Black women, we get really excited and thrilled, except that we've all been profoundly impacted by capitalist, racist, sexist environments and depending on, ableist and with gay oppression and all the things, right? Like we've all suffered from that. And at some point we turn that on each other, not because we're trying to, not because we want to, but it's the air we breathe. And it requires that in order to sustain the joy that we have when we have that initial contact with each other, that we continue to, I mean, we hear this expression a lot, decolonize ourselves so that we're not training our guns on each other, so that we can deepen our relationships with each other. And as we're doing that, that's how we find joy. It's not dependent on whether, and that actually means that it's joy that's not dependent on whether or not there are white guys around. Um, so I would say that in the CFTP, people did respond from, I don't want to say a lot of people, but people did respond to the CFP from uh, HBCUs. And when I think we were trying to include one of the works, but she actually had to drop out. She had a really interesting experience. It was both someone who had worked in military institutions and came back to an HBCU. So it was a really important voice, but I think she couldn't get things done in the way that we wanted to. And we really regret that we didn't have her story here because it was really powerful. Um, when we think about place assumption that they're PWA, what happens with it? Yeah, and I think, when it should feel like home, right? I think we have to know up front that, we we have to be, I don't want to say on alert. That's a little it's like the opposite of joy, but we have to be aware, right? That we are all the air that we breathe really is part of racism, it's part of sexism and so many of the other oppressions that we experience concurrently. And just because we're in a place where people look like us doesn't mean that we don't have the struggles that we need to have. One of the contributions was a woman who was sexually harassed by a Black man in a predominantly white institution, a man that you would think that she could go to say, hey, wow, it's rough in here. And he provided there was no quarter given, if you will, right? Um, I think, we have to know that even when we're amongst ourselves, that that's not, that we have that we're not, it may not be home. There may be places that are hostile, right? Um, I love the idea of the experiences of the others who have made it, right? Especially in the light of the industry targeting Black women and pulling us out of leadership as much as possible. I think that's absolutely the case. Why joy? I thought that's a really good question. And yeah, there's a book in history to steal our joy or something like that. I'm not sure if I'm getting the title right. Um, this is the thing that can be often not accessible to Black women. And it's our birthright. It's our birthright to have joy. just for many of us who ended up on in the Western Hemisphere, right? That was all purpose of the institution of slavery and the rest of it. I mean, it was to steal our labor, but to steal our joy was part of it. Like, like how do you enslave a people? Like, and that was actually the frustration of slavery, if you will, right? Like that we somehow kept our joy in the midst of all of it, right? And yeah, I mean, I think, and as things get harder and harder, we can find ways to lose touch of it, but it's not that we don't have that in us, and it's not because we don't want it, right? And we want it no matter what we're doing, right? And that actually, I don't know if it's too high a bar. It's our birthright, and from my humble opinion. Um, so before I got my cute, shiny PhD, I was a lawyer. And when I talk to other lawyers, I I'm like, wow, I think we need a when will the joy come for lawyers? So actually agree. I love the discussion that with our conversations that we can have across industries, like not even people with PhDs, but like, the number of industries we can, you know, the tech people, all sorts of people, right? That I do think it would be really helpful to, and actually a place for joy, right? If we could actually connect women across industries to do this, because girl, the stories I could tell about law, whew, both from myself and from my clients, yeah, wow. Um, I don't, so in other words, I don't think, I know, I know that the experiences that were documented in this book are not unique to academia in any way, shape, or form. They just aren't. Um, I think, in my talking about community care instead of just self-care, I think that is how my particular vision of joy of joy has changed. And the importance. I just spent not this past week, but the week before, with a new friend in my life, and I tear up at the thought of it because I miss having them around, and but but what was so nourishing about that connection was someone who was like, oh wait, if you're gonna do this, I'm gonna do it with you. And like, let's do this. It was, that you actually could deeply connect with people. And we're spending time with other people as well. And it's community that brings joy, ultimately. And I'm here for volume two, a comparative. I'm clearly here for volume two and volume three. I would like to see Black women across industries do this, and I also think Black faculty and across different countries would be really awesome as well. So I hope that spoke to what many of you said.
Oh, thank you so much. Okay, so I just wanted to give maybe like 5 minutes if the panelists want to just pick up on a point that someone else made before turning it over to our audience.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I would just like really want to, build up a little bit on what Ellen, said about thinking about the experience of Black women in the academia in North America who were not originally from those spaces, right? So what would those kinds of experience look like? And to me, it was really part of what I was thinking about. And I was thinking about when we think about, the identities, the this was also some forms of oppression, right? So we're thinking about, okay, now we're dealing with racism, sexism, and all of that. So just like really thinking more about when we add on the layers of, your nationality, your documentation status, your immigration status, right? What do all of this bring in to really complicate our experience further? So I think really like we'll be having other chapters that will speak to that, will equally be as powerful to put those kind of voices out there and see how they actually shape the experience of Black women in the academia who also have diverse nationality, immigration status, how it affects their voice, the ways that they're able to show up and experience or not experience joy in the academia. So I think for me also, that would be like a big part of understanding these experiences and what we do with them and what that means for us.
Right. Marcia, I thought your hand was going up too. Mhm.
Yes. I wanted to maybe just highlight and thank Takara for her comments. One about agency. So I think that is so important to highlight how much of the work that we're doing, especially related to DEI, and trying to create safe spaces on campuses, is work that we enjoy doing and we're committed to. But then, right, thinking about the limitations of what is possible in those spaces and how harmful it can be. If we can maybe talk about that a little bit more, I'd be very appreciative. But I was also interested in that idea of how, in reading this text, I was thinking about how DEI, that work, it's interesting. I think it has long been sort of requested and demanded of Black women in academia. Um, but at the same time, you know, if you really do that work, you are considered a threat to the space. And now that's become even more so, right? To Takara's point, in states like Texas and Florida. And I wondered, how sort of what's happening most recently, happening during, also what happened during the pandemic has, perhaps shaped and changed our experiences in terms of, maybe not how committed you are to doing that work, but how you navigate it, and the strategies you use to try to. I mean, I do think that community care would very much sort of help, to sort of bolster us as you do that work. But maybe some other strategies too, that we can maybe highlight to think about that. I think would be really helpful as well. So I just wanted to say thank you for that.
Great. Oh, Esther?
Yeah, and I'll be really quick. So I just also want to, thank Michelle for our response to think about how the experience that we also, the experience of racism, sexism at the very least also shaped the experience and the ways that Black women who are meant to support one another might also maybe just even be unable to, right? Because we're all dealing with all of these things at the same time. So I was really thinking about how I love how this book was really looking outward. And what I mean by that is to think about our experiences from PWI, experiences from, white supremacist, capitalist, imperialistic tendencies that we're all ways up against. But I was also wondering if there could be a component of looking inwards as well, right? And think more about, the ways that our experience of these forms, diverse forms of oppression shape the way that we also show up or do not show up for other Black women who, according to one of those chapters, were supposed to be catching their ends as we're also going on. So to think about the impact of our experiences of oppression, white supremacy, the impact of those on our mental health, right, on our physical health, and how sometimes it incapacitates us, or also sometimes just makes us unaware of the sort of impact that it's pushing onto others around us as well. So maybe a bit of also looking inward. And I love the chapter that looked inward into ethnic studies, right? Which is, what is supposed to be a space where, diversities were just taken for granted. We're all doing work of social justice. And then to think about those spaces as spaces that can be fraught with oppression and patriarchy, all of that. Beyond that, or in addition to that, I was also thinking of women's and gender studies, right? Where social justice is supposed to be taken for granted. We're supposed to be there for one another. And to add on to when Black guys are not around, sometimes even when men are not around, right? And white women are not around, and white men are not around. And it's just us Black women, right? Thinking critically about those spaces as well, and how we're able to not just seek joy for ourselves, but also spread the joy, right? But my question again is, if we are struggling with just having that joy for ourselves, how do we spread the joy, right? So thinking more intentionally about whether or not we're grappling with the joy, what does it mean to at least attempt to try to spread some joy if we have it? Well, maybe at this point I'm blabbing, but these things are complex and complicated, but I just wanted to put these thoughts out there as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Esther. So from our vantage point here, I can see the people in the audience. And so if there's a way, oh, yeah, let me just get Michelle and then we'll come back to audience. Yeah, Michelle.
I just wanted to speak to that last point that you made, Esther. It's just such a lovely, lovely point. As someone who works with people to get work-life balance, and really, it doesn't just kind of skims the surface of what my intention is. I think part I think what these industries do to us is that they put us in a consistent state of fight, flight, or freeze, right? It's just or fawn, and we end up profoundly dysregulated. And it's not just the industries, right? It's that we come as Black women, we come we were Black girls at one point, right? And many of our childhoods put us in that state all the time, right? Because that's just how you have to survive. That's how you navigate racism. It's how you navigate sexism. It's how you navigate ability, all sorts of things. And, you know, part of the community care project that I would love and envision for us is to actually have ways in which we can settle, like it's literally settling our nervous system so that we don't it's a way so that we can actually where we can actually come off the edge and go, oh, wait a minute. I'm having feelings, but these feelings aren't about you. These are feelings that I have to grapple with. And to be able to reach for someone to say, hey, I kind of need a minute to cry, or just hold my hand, or I'm scared in this moment. Um, it's that it's I really I'm very, very convinced that when we can actually be embodied, be in our bodies and connected with people, and actually be able to, like I said, keep our nervous systems at stasis. And most of us don't even know what that's even like, because we don't have the opportunity to be in that space for long. I think that's when we can actually create spaces that we can really feel joy with other people, with other Black women. So we're not we're not opening fire at each other. And we can really hold the multiplicity of experiences that we have with each other, in what we're doing. Okay, I'm gonna shut up.
Yes, Ellen.
Right. I just want to like do a quick follow-up from Esther's comments. Reading through the book, one of the things that strikes me most is how, dedicated Black women in the academia and arts, the academic community. I feel that sometimes it could be a little bit overwhelming, or a whole lot, like be very, very overwhelming. Certainly when you combine that with your own personal development, domestic responsibilities, spousal responsibilities, and the rest of all that. So that then raises the question of, is it like, can you be able to draw a line and not be judged? And then if that is a yes, at what point can you say this is so much? Like I can't, there's only a little that I can take, or this is where I draw the line and I cannot take any more responsibility, I can't take up any more mentorship, I can't be a part of any more community. So at what point can you do that and not be considered maybe anti-Black, anti-human, or yeah.
Mm. That's such a tough one. Um, I have to admit that I initially found the book a little triggering, because just reading about, the experience of these other Black women, reminded me of some of my own very debilitating experiences. Um, I experienced tremendous burnout at my first institution. And it was to the point where I was on the bus. We had a little shuttle bus that went to the parking lot. And somebody said to me, "How are you?" And I burst into tears. Um, I was trying to get my work done. I was chairing Women's and Gender Studies. I was on the steering committee for African and African American studies, partly because of one of our junior faculty who was coming up for third year review. I was on the steering committee for Latin American and Caribbean Studies, again, to help support and protect a junior faculty member coming up for third year review. And I was not taking care of myself. In fact, I really so appreciate what Michelle said about community care. Because the other thing too is, I come from a family where my parents' formal education ended in primary school in Jamaica. And so we had no experience in, I didn't have anybody in my family I could go to. And so it was the community that I could create around me. But I ended up leaving that institution partly because the burnout, but partly because, there's only so long you can create joy on the margins. And I think not only was I marginalized as a Black woman in the academy. So I'm not American by birth. I was born in Jamaica, but then I taught Africa. And Africa is so marginalized in many of our departments. So, it just got so confounded. Um, but, it's precisely why I think this conversation is so important, because it's an important reminder that if we ultimately don't take care of ourselves, then we can't do, the things that we want to do for ourselves. And I say that as someone who actually loves intellectual work, who love the topics I work on. For me, it wasn't part of what motivated me was, this is how I did my politics. And that's one of the things that Walter Rodney said, you do your politics where you work. Um, I had to choose between being a political activist and staying in grad school. And there was a choice my advisor put in front of me because the thesis was getting slowed up. But once I had that revelation that I could do my politics in the academy, it made all the difference. But it's all of you have pointed out the sort of the complexity of doing what it is that we do in these spaces, and not just surviving, but also thriving. Gloria, yeah. I saw your lips moving there, so I knew you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I want to commend the editors and, of course, the powerful panelists for issues you raised. And I got a copy of the book about maybe 3 months ago, but I've not been able to read it. So what I'm going to say or ask will be based on the fact that I've not read the book. Maybe it's those issues are covered. One thing I want to point out when it comes to the academy as a space, I think it is, I don't know how much introductory work is done in the book to define the academia and of course to delineate different categories. It is unfortunate that somebody who is supposed to come from the HBCU to present that perspective couldn't meet the deadline or something like that. But again, it is important to indicate that there are different categories. And even within predominantly white institutions, there are institutions that are headed by Black men as presidents. There are others that are headed by Black women as presidents. What are the differences? What are the dynamics? Are there changes pertaining to the experiences of Black faculty in these institutions. And of course, even within historically Black institutions and universities, there are a few that are headed by white men. Of course, some of us read with shock the case of, I think, Candia Belly, who was a vice president of Lincoln, vice president for student affairs at Lincoln University, Missouri, who killed herself because she made several requests from a white president that couldn't listen to her. So there are a lot of complexities and different layers that need to be problematized in the introductory part of this book to give a bigger grasp of what we are dealing with and what the Black women in how many chapters did I hear? 13 chapters are dealing with. Then another aspect is the transnational dimension of the experiences of Black women in the US academy. There are different levels. There are African American or American born female faculty members. There are people that came from other parts of the world. I'm glad that Judy just shared her experience, having come from Jamaica. There are quite a number of us who came from different countries of Africa who didn't go to school in the United States. Our experiences are not the same as those who went to acquire their higher education or who acquired their higher education from American universities. We didn't have access to mentors. Our professors and advisors were not pushing us or opening network for us to be interviewed for jobs. We were on our own without knowing who to. We didn't have any community whatsoever. So the experiences differ. There are different categories that needed to be indicated in the introductory part of the work. And again, back to the issue of joy. The question I have is, does fulfillment bring joy, or does any form of accomplishment bring joy? What's the difference between joy and fulfillment, if I can put it that way? So let me end here, but I want to commend their work, because this summer, at least when I get back, I will find time to read the book. Thank you.
Anyone want to respond to Gloria's question?
I think that number one, I just got a text from Robin. She set her alarm for 2 p.m. instead of 2 a.m. She's in California in the US. So she clearly, she just woke up. So she extends her apologies and yes, so I'm holding it down for the editors. I want to tackle a question of fulfillment and joy. Again, and this is an ever evolving set of thoughts that I'm having. Again, in under capitalism, and I keep talking about it this way because we're in a point, like in the United States, we're feeling it a particular way. In the rest of the world, right? My family's from Jamaica. I was, I wasn't born there, but it was like I was the most Jamaican child you're going to find in Chicago, right? In some ways, right? With that said, right? It's hitting, like, the ways in which capitalism has really hit and impacted the world is profound, right? And we're seeing this in the context of the climate emergency. So I keep coming back, in many other ways, right? The resurgence of right-wing religious beliefs and all sorts of things. Fulfillment in that context feels like a much more external measure, right? If I get, if I accomplish, if I do, then then right, I've checked the boxes. I don't know if it has to be that way, but that's the feel that fulfillment has for me. Joy is a state. It's not a state that's always with us. Um, but it's just it's a way it's a way to be. Um, it's simply a way to be, and that feels much more, in some ways it seems more ephemeral, but at the same time, once we have a sense of it, it feels more stable. It feels more accessible and more and more really grounding. And I'm not saying that fulfillment doesn't contribute to joy. I'm not saying they're unrelated, but I think we have to, I think to really find joy, we have to avoid looking externally to things that has to come from within.
Do we have any more questions from the room? Or just thoughts that people would like to share? I do have one thing that I wanted to bring up, and Michelle, your emphasis on reminding us that capitalism shapes these institutions in which we work um, has to do with sort of the speed up that has happened, and the change in requirements for these jobs. One of the things that I combated was at that same institution where I was burnt out. I was also being told I was a stuck associate because I didn't turn around the second book in, the same time that I turned around the dissertation. And it's like nobody you know, did not acknowledge the fact that the dissertation doesn't happen in 6 years. I mean, your first book doesn't happen in 6 years. It's the dissertation and then 6 years to revise it. That's the first book. And I had to turn a deaf ear to all these people who kept reminding me I was a stuck associate. But I knew what I needed to know, and I needed to get to a point where I felt I understood the material enough so I could write this book. And at the end of the day, I felt very happy. There was joy, there was fulfillment about completing this book, but it was more about completing it the way I wanted to do it, in a way that I thought really honored all those women and men who gave me hours. I would just show up at somebody's door and I'd say, so and so told me I should talk to you. And people, spoke to me for hours, beyond all the time I spent in the archive and all of that. Um, and I think it's really hard in this system where to actually do work that brings you that sort of fulfillment. Some people say it's the model from the sciences that's now being applied to the humanities. Um, and in the humanities, we're constantly being told we're the drag on the academy. And so, we're fighting all of these really disparaging contexts. Folks sometimes forget that we're Black women who also like the intellectual work that we do, and they keep thinking that we don't really care about our intellectual work. So there's such a tension that I have to keep reminding people my summers I'm not available for anything, because summers are when I do research or when I write. And you think that in the academy you shouldn't have to fight for that, but part of it is that they don't respect us as intellectuals, we're there to check the boxes that say they they have diversified their faculty. So it's a rant. Esther.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. I just wanted to piggyback on what Gloria said. And I think I really appreciate the fact that she was raising those questions about the various categories of institutions that we have and the identities of persons who might be in the position of authority and how that would shape the experiences of Black women in those spaces. And I was just really thinking back to what you also just said, Judy, about institutions. So to be able to think about institutions sometimes on the one hand, and then individuals in power in those institutions on the other end, right? So sometimes what we're just really up against is the way that the academia as an institution or as a system, right, operates under capitalist white supremacist tendencies. And sometimes it wouldn't matter the racial, gender, any kind of identity of the people in power, because it's a system that can actually subsume or swallow individuals, and we're all either fighting or flying, like Michelle said. So that can be something to really understand, that when we're up against this institution and the way that they've been established and run, sometimes it wouldn't matter who is in a position of authority, because it can just be a system that operates and replicates itself in diverse spaces, other different kinds of authorities and institutions and administration. That said, also, I think also sometimes individuals within those institutions, individuals in the position of power in those institutions have the responsibility and sometimes can take it upon themselves, right, to define how they experience their power or how they exert their authority, how well or not at all they support people. So sometimes when we're trying to distinguish institutions and individuals, that's a possibility, but sometimes we can also have individuals within PWI who will be supportive because they haven't been swallowed up with this capitalist white supremacist tendencies of the institution. So I just wanted to really think through that, because I've had all kinds of experiences thinking about spaces and people and how that in itself sometimes wouldn't be a monolith, and individuals and institutions can be so separated sometimes, but also just like kind of like meshed together at some point. So yeah.
So we have one last minute. And so before we go, I just want to thank each of the panelists this morning, thank our audience. Clearly, this is an important book and it's such a rich topic. And I, for one, support the idea of more volumes inspired by this book. I think it's just, thank you all so much. Convey to the other co-editors just how inspiring this book has been to all of us here. And thank you all again for getting up and being on time for this amazing panel. Sorry that we're not there with you in Lagos, but as Esther said, we need to spread the joy. So have a wonderful time, wonderful rest of the day wherever you are. Talk about the joy and spread it. Okay, thank you so much to our host and the young man who was taking care of us this morning. Okay, bye now.
We didn't know that.